She heard wolves howling above the frozen peaks of Telluride and was told an animal had been chained on the ice to die. A veterinarian hiding from her own past drove through the blizzard to save it and found no animal at all. A man, bare to the killing cold, with burning amber eyes. The instant her skin touched his, a moon bloomed across her shoulder, and the wolf she'd buried alive came roaring back. "Welcome to our channel. Tell us where you're listening from today." The howling started just after midnight, and Maren Hollis had learned long ago not to ignore the sounds the mountains made when they were afraid. She had built her clinic at the edge of Telluride precisely because the town ended there and the wilderness began, because the people who needed her most were the ones who lived between the two. The ranch dogs, the half-feral barn cats, the wounded things that wandered down from the San Juan Mountains expecting nothing and finding her porch light on. She liked it that way. A woman who had spent her whole life being watched too closely had earned the right to a quiet she could finally control. In 8 years, she had built that quiet board by board, appointment by appointment, until the woman she had once been on the cold eastern plains felt like someone she had only read about once, in a book she had returned to the library and tried very hard to forget. But the howl that came through her window that night was not the lonely call of a coyote or the territorial warning of some neighbor's husky. It was longer, lower. It carried a grief so human that Maren set down her coffee and stood very still in the dark of her kitchen, listening, the hair rising along her arms. The sound went into her like a key into a lock she had welded shut, and something behind that lock turned over in its sleep. It was the kind of sound she had spent 8 years teaching herself not to recognize. Her phone buzzed against the counter. A text from old Katie Brennan, who ran the supply store out on the highway and knew everything that happened above the tree line. Before it happened, Maren. Some men dragged something up to Bald Ridge tonight, chained it out on the ice, said it was a wolf gone bad, dangerous, needed putting out where it couldn't hurt anyone. You didn't hear this from me. But if you've got a heart, you'll go before sunrise. Nothing lasts the cold up there. Maren read it twice. Chained, on the ice, left to freeze. She thought about the kind of men who would do that, who would take a living creature, however frightened they were of it, and stake it out under the open sky to die slowly of a cold that had no mercy in it. She had seen what that kind of cruelty looked like up close, once, in a life she had walked away from. She had stood in a room full of powerful men who spoke of living things as property, as assets, as problems to be managed, and she had promised herself on the night she ran that she would never again stand quietly by while something helpless was thrown away. So she did not finish the coffee. She pulled on her parka and her insulated boots, grabbed the emergency kit and the heavy bolt cutters from the clinic, and loaded the truck while the engine coughed and warmed against the brutal 12 below. The road up to Bald Ridge was barely a road at all past the last switchback, just a scar of frozen gravel that her tires fought for every foot, and snow began to spit against the windshield, then to fall in earnest. The wipers dragged. The dark pressed in on either side. "Don't," said the cautious voice she had carried out of her old life, the voice that had kept her alive and small and unseen for almost a decade. "Whatever it isn't yours to save. You ran 2,000 miles so you would never have to be the brave one again. Turn around, go home, lock the door." But she kept driving because the howling had stopped, and somehow the silence where it had been was so much worse than the sound. The ridge opened in front of her headlights like the edge of the world. A wide white shelf of wind-scoured ice, the valley dropping away into black on every side, the peaks beyond it catching a thin and pitiless starlight. And there, in the center of it, staked between 2 iron pins driven deep into the frozen ground, was the shape she had come to find. Not a wolf. A man. Maren's breath stopped in her throat. She killed the engine and shoved out into the wind, and the cold hit her like a wall of standing water, stealing the air from her lungs, and still she ran, stumbling across the ice, because the figure chained out there was not an animal at all. It was a man, broad-shouldered, bare to the waist in weather that should have killed him in minutes, his blonde hair stiff and white with frost, his wrists raw where the iron cuffs had bitten down. His head hung forward against his chest. He was not moving. "No, no, no!" She dropped to her knees beside him, the bolt cutters clattering against the ice. Up close he was enormous, the long muscles of his back carved and pale and faintly steaming in the freezing air, as though something inside him still burned hot enough to fight the cold from the inside out. She pressed 2 fingers to the side of his throat, beneath the line of his jaw, the way she would with any patient. A pulse. Slow. Impossibly slow. Slower than any living thing should survive. But there, steady, refusing. "Okay. Okay, I've got you." She fell into the voice she used on the table, low and certain, the voice that had talked 1,000 frightened animals back from the edge of panic. "Stay with me now, you hear me? Stay with me, I've got you. You're not dying out here tonight, not on my watch." His eyes opened. They were amber. Not brown, not hazel, not any ordinary color a human eye had a right to be. A clear, burning amber that caught the thin starlight and held it like something lit from within. And when they found her face, they did not soften with relief or sharpen with alarm. They filled instead with a recognition so sudden and so total that it stopped her hands where they worked. He looked at her the way a man lost at sea looks at a shoreline. He looked at her as though he had been waiting in the cold his entire life for exactly this face to lean over him out of the dark. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. His voice was wrecked, scraped down to gravel. "They'll catch your scent. You have to get away from here. You have to save your strength and stop telling me my business." She fit the jaws of the bolt cutters around the chain at his right wrist and threw her whole weight against the long handles. The frozen link resisted, then sheared with a crack like a gunshot. His arm dropped free, and on pure reflex his bare hand shot out and closed around her forearm to steady himself. And her skin caught fire. The moment his hand wrapped her wrist, white heat seared up Maren's arm like a brand pressed to bare flesh, and beneath 3 layers of wool on the curve of her shoulder, where no living person had been allowed to look in 8 years, something began to rise toward the surface of her skin in the unmistakable building shape of a moon. The heat was nothing like the cold around her. It was the opposite of cold entirely. A flooding, unbearable warmth that started where his fingers gripped her and raced inward, into her chest, into her bones, into the old hidden place beneath her collarbone that she had spent 8 years pretending was empty. Maren heard herself cry out. She tried to pull her arm back and could not. The amber eyes were locked on hers, wide now, and in them she saw a shock that mirrored her own exactly. His cracked lips parting around a single word she refused to let herself understand. "You," he breathed. And then the heat reached her shoulder and crested, and the white ridge tilted under her, and the frozen ground rose up to meet her, as everything she knew went dark. When Maren woke, she was warm. That was the first wrong thing, and her mind seized on it before she could even open her eyes. She had fallen on a frozen ridge in 12 below weather, miles from anyone, and she should have woken in the back of an ambulance, or in a hospital, or not woken at all. Instead, she was warm. Deeply, completely warm, the kind of warmth that reaches the marrow, lying in an enormous bed beneath a heavy cream-wool quilt in a room of dark timber and grey stone, with a fire burning low and orange in a hearth nearly the size of a doorway. Tall windows along one wall showed nothing at all but the churning grey-white of a snowstorm hurling itself against the glass. The bed smelled of cedar, and beneath the cedar of something warmer and harder to name, something that reached into the oldest part of her brain and made it go quiet and still and unafraid in a way she had refused to allow herself to feel for almost a decade. She sat up too fast and her head swam. The collar of her shirt had been loosened, not removed, only the top button slipped free, and a blanket tucked carefully to her chin. And when she pulled the wool aside and looked down at her own bare shoulder, she saw it. A moon. Silver-white, perfectly crescent, etched cleanly into her skin as though it had always belonged there, glowing very faintly in the firelight. It was not a burn. There was no blister, no broken skin, no pain. It was not a scar. It was a mark, and she knew with a sick and certain lurch exactly what kind of mark it was, because she had grown up among people who bore them, in the world she had run 2,000 miles east to west to escape forever. "It came up the moment I touched you," said a voice from the doorway. "I've lived a long time among my own kind, and I've never once seen it happen like that. So fast, so sure, as if it had only been waiting for the excuse." He filled the frame of the door. The man from the ice, alive now, dry and warm, dressed in a dark shirt that did absolutely nothing to disguise the size and breadth of him, his blonde hair pushed back from a strong face, his amber eyes fixed on her with a careful, deliberate, almost painful gentleness, as though she were a wounded creature he was terrified of frightening back into the dark, which she supposed, looking down at the impossible thing on her own shoulder, she was. "Where am I?" Maren said. It did not come out as a question. She did not have the breath to spare to make it one. "My home, high up, above the timberline, the north face of the mountain. You've been out for the better part of a day and a night." He did not come closer. He stayed exactly where he was in the doorway, hands open and loose and visible at his sides, giving her the whole room as distance between them, the way a person does when they understand that the most generous thing they can offer is space. "My name is Asher Vance. You drove up a closed mountain road in a blizzard to free a stranger you believed was a dying animal. You saved my life on that ridge, and I owe you more than I will ever know how to say. But I think you already understand that what happened up there tonight was not an ordinary rescue." "I don't understand anything." She pulled the quilt up to cover the mark, as if hiding it could unmake it. "I'm a veterinarian. Somebody told me there was an animal chained out on the ice to freeze, and I couldn't let that stand, so I went up to help it. That is the whole of it. That is all this is." "Then how do you explain your shoulder?" "Cold injury. A pressure burn from the strap of my kit. I don't—" "Maren." He said her name very softly, and she went cold all over, because she had never once told it to him. "I can read a lie the way you can read a fever off a horse's flank. It's part of what I am. I've been able to do it my whole life, and I've never been able to stop." He paused, and chose the next words with visible care, as though he understood precisely how much each one was going to cost her to hear. "And I can read what you are. There is wolf in you, under all of it, under the fear, under the human clothes and the human work, and the 8 years of practiced pretending. There is a wolf in you, and she has been wide awake since the second your skin touched mine." "That's impossible," Maren whispered. "Aaron." But even as she said it, the silver mark on her shoulder pulsed once, warm and slow and certain as a second heartbeat, and somewhere deep beneath her ribs, in the place she had bricked over and mortared shut and turned her back on years ago, something that had been sleeping a long and grieving sleep lifted its head in the dark and listened and answered him. "I'm human," Maren said. She stood now, on the far side of the great bed, putting its broad expanse between them like a barricade, the quilt clutched to her shoulder. Her veterinarian's voice had come back to her at last, the calm, flat, careful voice she used to deliver the worst news in the world to grieving owners across an exam table, and she held on to it the way a drowning woman holds a length of rope. I am a human woman, Mr. Vance. And whatever it is you think you sense, whatever this mark on my shoulder is, none of it makes me your anything. There is no such thing as a soul being predestined for another soul. There is no such thing as one person being made, against their will and before they're even grown, to belong to another. That is a story. It's a story powerful people tell to dress up the things they want to do anyway. I have lived inside that story. I know exactly what it is worth, and it is worth nothing. Something moved across his face. Not anger, not the wounded pride she had braced for, something quieter and far more telling, like a man turning over a stone and finding underneath it the missing piece of something he had been trying to understand for a long time. "Someone told you that you were promised," he said slowly, "didn't they? Someone sat you down before you were old enough to argue and decided who you belonged to, and they called it destiny, so you couldn't say no." Though Maren's jaw tightened until it ached. She said nothing at all. The silence was answer enough, and they both knew it. Asher let out a long, slow breath, and then he did something she did not expect. He lowered himself into the worn leather chair beside the fire, deliberately making himself smaller, folding his great frame down into something less, taking himself out of the space between her and the door. "Then I understand why you hate that word," he said. "And I won't use it. Not tonight, not ever, if you don't want me to. I will only tell you what's true, and then you can do with the truth whatever you decide to do. That part stays yours. And what do you imagine is true? I am the alpha of the Timberline Pack. We've lived in these mountains for 140 years, quiet, careful, hidden in plain sight among the towns and the ranches. Most people drive right past us their whole lives and never know." His voice was even, unhurried, the voice of a man telling a hard thing plainly. 3 nights ago, men from inside my own pack, men who decided they wanted to lead it differently, harder than I am willing to, drugged me and chained me and carried me up to Bald Ridge to leave me where the cold would do their work for them, and no one would ever have to answer for it. They were certain of one thing above all others. They were certain that no one would come. "And the mark," Maren said, "on my shoulder, on yours. A mate bond." He said it carefully, as though the words themselves were fragile. "It's the rarest thing our kind has. The thing every wolf longs for, and almost none of us ever find. Most of my people live and die and never once meet the soul that answers their own. But when two who are bonded touch for the first time, skin to skin, it shows. It rises up out of the body on its own. It cannot be drawn on, it cannot be faked, and it absolutely cannot be forced into being by anyone's will." His amber eyes lifted and held hers across the firelit room. "And it cannot, Maren, appear on the skin of a true human being, because a human has no wolf inside to answer the call, which means that whoever raised you to believe you were nothing more than a frightened girl to be guarded and bargained and married off. They were lying to you. You were never powerless. You were very likely the strongest soul in any room they ever put you in, and someone took a great deal of care to make absolutely certain you never found that out." The fire popped and settled. Outside, the storm flung itself against the tall windows in long, howling waves, and Maren felt the whole careful architecture of 8 years of self-protection groan and shift beneath the weight of one single, unbearable possibility. That the thing she had hated and starved and run from all this time, the thing she had been taught to fear in herself, had never been a curse at all, that it had been a strength, and that someone had wanted to own it so badly they had taught her to hate it instead. "I want to go home," she said. Her voice cracked straight down the middle. "Right now, tonight. I want to go back to my clinic and my life, and I want to forget every word of this." Asher rose without argument and crossed to the tall windows, and he gestured out at what lay beyond the glass, and the sight of it took the fight clean out of her. The storm had become a true whiteout. There was no road, there was no ridge, no down, no sky, no horizon, only a solid churning wall of snow and wind that had swallowed the entire world. "The pass is closed," he said quietly, his back to her, his breath fogging the cold glass. "Nothing moves on this mountain until it breaks, not my truck, not anyone's. The moment it clears, I'll drive you down myself. I give you my word on that, and I'm a man who has nearly died for less than his word." He turned back to face her, and there was no triumph anywhere in him, only a tired and rueful gentleness. "But tonight, the mountain has made the decision for both of us, and the answer is that you're staying. So I'll sleep downstairs by the door, where you can hear me come and go. This room locks from the inside. The key is in the lock. You're as safe here, Maren, as anyone has ever been anywhere. I would walk back out onto that ice and let it take me before I let one single thing in this house frighten you." And he left. He pulled the door shut behind him gently, and she heard his heavy tread go down the stairs, and she was alone with the fire and the storm and the impossible moon on her shoulder. He had left her the whole house, and every lock in it, and the key sitting plainly in the door, and that, more than any chain, more than any mark, more than any word he had spoken, was the thing that finally undid her. Because in 8 long years of being watched and guarded and protected and claimed and kept, in a whole life of being treated as a thing too precious and too valuable to be trusted with itself, no one, not once, not ever, had thought to simply hand her the key and walk away. She crossed the room on bare feet. She put her hand on the cold iron key, and for a long, long time she did not turn it. She did not turn it because, for the first time in 8 years, she was trying to decide what she actually wanted rather than what would keep her safest, and she had genuinely forgotten how. The two had been the same thing for so long that she had no practice telling them apart. Safe said, lock the door, put your back to the wall, trust nothing that smells like kindness, because kindness on the plains had always been the bait on somebody's hook. But underneath Safe, very quietly, something else was speaking, something that had been silent so long she barely recognized its voice. It said, "He gave you the key." It said, "No one who means to cage you ever hands you the key." It said, "Smallest of all, you are tired, Maren. You have been holding this door shut with your whole body for 8 years. Aren't you so tired?" She left the key in the lock and did not turn it, and she lay down on top of the cream wool quilt without getting under it, fully dressed, ready to run. And she slept, for the first time in longer than she could remember, all the way through until morning, without once waking to check the dark. When she opened her eyes, the fire had burned down to embers, and grey daylight filled the windows, and the storm still raged, and she lay very still and listened, and from downstairs came the small domestic sounds of a large man trying and failing to be quiet in a kitchen, and the smell of coffee badly made. And Maren Hollis lay in a stranger's bed at the top of the world and felt, against all her training, against every hard-won instinct, profoundly and inexplicably safe. It terrified her more than the cold ever had. The storm held them on the mountain for one more full day, and it should have been unbearable. By every law Maren had lived by, it should have been a nightmare. Snowed in at the top of the world, trapped in a stranger's house with a man who calmly insisted he was a wolf, the mark on her shoulder warming like a coal every single time he came within arm's reach of her. She had spent 8 years arranging her entire existence so that she would never again be confined anywhere with anyone who held power over her. Instead, something strange and quiet and entirely unexpected happened between them. They talked. He made coffee badly and apologized for it before she'd even tasted it. She fixed it without a word and turned away so he wouldn't see her almost smile. He showed her the house because there was nowhere else to go. The long room of south-facing windows where, he said, he sat to watch the weather climb up over the peaks. The deep shelves crowded with worn and dog-eared books, more of them than she'd have guessed. The photographs in plain wood frames along the mantel. They were not the photographs of a king and his subjects. They were the photographs of a family. Laughing faces crowded around a long table heaped with food, a bonfire ringed with people, a wiry, dark-haired woman caught mid-laugh with her head thrown back, whom he named as Quinn, and said with a kind of helpless affection, would either love Maren on sight or interrogate her down to the bone, and quite possibly both inside the same hour. He spoke about his pack, the way Maren spoke about her animals, as beings he was responsible for, as lives whose pain landed in his own body before it landed anywhere else. "That's the whole reason they could take me in the end," he said, when she finally asked how an entire pack could turn on the wolf who led it. He turned his coffee mug slowly between his big hands and watched the fire. An alpha who is willing to do anything to keep his place is a very hard man to chain. But an alpha who isn't, an alpha who won't put his own people down, even when those same people have decided to put him down, that man is easy. I won't do it. I never have, and I won't start. So they use the one thing about me they could be sure of. He shrugged, but the shrug did not make it all the way up to his eyes. Mercy reads like weakness from the outside, right up until the moment it doesn't. "That isn't weakness," Maren said, and the words were out of her before she had decided to let them go. "Choosing not to become the thing that hurt you. That's not weakness. That's the only kind of strength that's ever actually worth anything." He looked at her then. Really looked, set down the mug, turned the full weight of those amber eyes on her, as though she had just said something he had waited his whole life to hear out loud. And the air in the warm room changed, thickened, became something that neither of them was willing to name out loud. By the time the storm finally broke on the second grey morning, and the radio crackled to life with the news that the county had reopened the pass, something had taken root in the long, quiet spaces between their words. Asher kept his promise the instant it was given the chance, without being reminded, without making her ask. He loaded her and her kit into a heavy truck with chains already fitted to the tires and drove her with enormous care down off the White Mountain to the door of her own clinic. And when they got there, he did not reach for her, did not push, did not so much as let his hand brush hers. He only looked at her for a moment and said, "Thank you for not letting them win, whatever else comes of this. Thank you for that." And then he was gone, the truck grinding back up the road into the snow. Maren told herself that was the end of it. It was not, of course, anything remotely like the end of it. He came back the very next morning. Not to press his claim, not to argue the bond, not to so much as mention the mark on her shoulder, but standing on her clinic porch in worn flannel and a pair of leather work gloves, with 2 paper cups of coffee in his hands and snow in his hair, asking, almost shyly, whether she could maybe use an extra pair of hands today. A horse had foundered badly out on the old Delgado ranch. It was a 4-person job, and she had exactly 1 veterinarian, which was herself. He was good with the animals. He was, in fact, unnervingly good. They went calm and trusting and loose-limbed under his hands in the exact way that the deepest, most starved part of Maren wanted to and would not let herself. He cradled the head of the terrified, thrashing gelding and murmured to it in a voice too low for her to catch the words, and the animal, which had cracked a stall door and badly spooked 2 grown ranch hands not an hour before, stood for him quiet and gentle as a lamb in the snow. "You're cheating," she accused him afterward, stripping off her gloves, hiding the unsteadiness in her own hands. "A little," he admitted, with no shame at all. "But honestly, mostly, I just listen for what they're afraid of. That's the whole trick with the frightened ones. Most fear in this world is only some true thing that was never once allowed to be heard out loud." His amber gaze flicked to her, and then away, out toward the white peaks. "Works the same on animals as it does on people. The cure's the same too. You just listen, you don't look away, and you let them learn, slow in their own time, that this once it's safe to be heard." He came back the day after that, and the day after that one, and the one after that. He never asked her to admit what she was. He never once said the word wolf to her again. And that endless, undemanding patience turned out to be the most disarming thing of all, because every single morning that Asher Vance appeared on her porch with 2 coffees and no expectations, and asked for nothing but the chance to be useful, Maren felt the wolf she had buried alive 8 years ago creep 1 cautious inch further out of the dark, drawn into the open by the unbearable, unfamiliar warmth of being wanted without being owned. It was the one thing her whole life had never prepared her to defend against. She had armor for cruelty, armor for control, armor for men who wanted to use her. She had spent 8 years forging all of it. She had no armor at all for a man who simply showed up, asked nothing, helped where he could, and went home. The kindness slipped straight past every wall she had, because none of her walls had ever been built to stop a thing that wasn't trying to take anything from her. There were small things in those weeks that she would never have been able to explain to anyone who had not lived the life she had lived. The way he always knocked, for one, even when the clinic door stood wide open, even when she had already called out for him to come in. He knocked anyway, every time, a soft knuckle against the frame, a question he asked before he ever crossed her threshold. She did not understand at first why it made her throat tighten. Then one evening, scrubbing instruments at the long steel sink with her back to him, it came to her all at once, in 8 years of being kept and guarded on the plains, not one door had ever been hers to grant or refuse. People had walked into her rooms as though her rooms were theirs. They had decided when she slept and where she stood and whose company she kept. A door she controlled was a thing she had never once owned. And this enormous, quiet man, who could have torn her clinic door clean off its hinges with one hand, asked permission to come through it every single time, as though her yes were the most valuable currency in the world. "You don't have to knock," she told him finally, not turning around. "I know," he said. She heard him set the coffee down on the counter. "That's exactly why I do." She found herself watching him work on the slow days. He had a way with the animals that had nothing to do with size or strength. He never pinned a frightened creature, never forced one still. He waited. He let a shaking dog smell the back of his hand for as long as the dog needed, 10 seconds or 10 minutes, until something in the animal decided on its own that this large, quiet man was not a threat. Maren had spent her whole life being handled the other way, held down, decided for. She had never once seen it done like this, where the frightened thing was allowed to arrive at trust by its own road, in its own time, and was never punished for how long the road took. "Where'd you learn that?" she asked him once. "My mother." He didn't look up from the cat he was coaxing out of a carrier. "She used to say you can't order an animal to feel safe. You can only be safe over and over until they notice. Then one day they just set it down. The fear. They put it down because they don't need it anymore." He scratched the cat's chin. It leaned into his hand. "People are the same. Mostly we're all just waiting to find out it's safe to put it down." Maren said nothing. She turned to the sink so he wouldn't see her face, and ran the water too hot, and told herself the sting in her eyes was the steam. One bitter night a calving went wrong out past the reservoir, and they worked side by side in a freezing barn until well past 2 in the morning, and lost the calf anyway, and very nearly lost the mother too, before Maren's hands and Asher's steadiness together pulled her back from the edge. Afterward they sat together on a bale of hay in the cold barn, both of them filthy and exhausted and silent, watching the saved cow breathe. "You did everything right," Asher said quietly. I watched you. Every choice exactly right. Sometimes the cold takes them anyway. That isn't yours to carry. I know the medicine, Maren said. Her voice came out rougher than she meant it to. I always know the medicine. It's the rest of it I can't. She stopped, started again. Where I come from, if you lost something valuable, it was a failure, a mark against you. You learned very fast not to let anything matter, because the things that mattered were the things they could use against you. I got so good at not letting things matter that I forgot how to do anything else. Asher said nothing for a long moment. Then he reached over, slowly, telegraphing every inch of the movement so she could stop him if she wanted, and he covered her cold hand with his warm one, where it rested on the hay between them. Let it matter, he said. The calf, the cow, all of it. Let every bit of it matter, and let it hurt when you lose, and let me sit here with you while it does. That's not a weakness anyone can use against you anymore, Maren. Out here, the things that matter to you are the things that get protected. That's the whole arrangement. It's the only arrangement I've ever been willing to offer anyone. She did not pull her hand away. It was, she realized later, the first time in 8 years she had let another living person see her grieve something and had not been afraid of what it would cost her. He told her about the pack too, in pieces, on the long, quiet afternoons between patients. He told her about a family of 3 he had taken in 2 winters before, after their own pack to the south had cast them out over a debt the father could never have repaid. How the man had arrived, braced to be turned away again, and instead had been handed a cabin, a job, and a seat at the long table, and had wept at that table in front of everyone, and how no one had looked away or pretended not to see. He told her about the elderly couple at the top of the ridge that the whole pack took turns checking on through the deep of winter. He told her about Quinn, who had lost her own mate years before Maren ever arrived, and who had poured the love she could no longer give to one person into the keeping of an entire community instead. That's what a pack is supposed to be, he said. Not a man at the top and everyone beneath him, a net, woven tight enough that nobody falls all the way through. The pack you ran from forgot that somewhere along the line. They started believing the strong exist to be served by the weak, instead of the other way around. He looked at her steadily. It's the other way around, Maren. It has always only ever been the other way around. The strong exist to carry the ones who can't carry themselves. Anyone who tells you different is only dressing up their own appetite and calling it law. Maren turned the words over for a long time after he had gone home that night. She had been raised to believe that strength was a thing you hoarded, a wall you built, a blade you kept sheathed and ready. She was only now beginning to understand that she had never once, in all her life, seen strength used the way Asher used his, spent freely, given away, laid down like a bridge for other people to walk across. It frightened her more than any threat ever had. Because a person could run from a threat, she did not yet know how a person was supposed to run from being, at long last, truly safe. The weeks turned, and the snow on the high peaks deepened, and somewhere in the slow accumulation of ordinary days, Asher Vance became a fixed and necessary point in the carefully guarded world Maren Hollis had built for herself. He learned the rhythm of her clinic the way other men learned a language. He learned that she went quiet and clipped and overly precise with her instruments when a case frightened her. He learned that she made terrible, dry little jokes in exactly the moments when a case was hopeless, as a way of keeping her own hands steady. He learned that she sat with the dying ones long after every bit of her work was done, and the owners had gone home to grieve, stroking their fur in the dim light, so that no creature under her care ever went into the dark, entirely alone. He learned these things slowly and completely, the way a devout man learns scripture, and he never once told her he was keeping count. And Maren, against every defense she had, learned him too. She learned that the great and formidable alpha of the Timberline pack was in private almost foolishly gentle, that he gave away far more than he ever kept for himself, that the enormous weight of caring for so many lives had carved fine lines around his eyes a decade too early. She learned that when he laughed for real, head tipped back, the deep sound of it filling her small, bright exam room, something behind her own ribs that had been locked for 8 years slid open another quiet fraction every single time. She also learned, and could no longer pretend otherwise, that the wolf inside her was waking all the way up. It came in small betrayals of her own body. She heard things now that she had no business hearing. A heartbeat 2 rooms away, through a closed door, a truck on the highway a full minute before its headlights ever swung into view. She caught scents threading on the wind and knew them, named them, the way she had as a child before she taught herself to stop. And one night, alone in her dark kitchen, she had stood at the window watching an enormous full moon haul itself up over the black teeth of the peaks, and she had felt such a wild, aching, bone-deep pull toward it that she had pressed her forehead to the freezing glass and wept, because she finally fully understood that the thing she had spent 8 years trying to kill inside herself had never once died. It had only been grieving. All this time, locked in the dark and grieving and waiting to be let back out into the light. She tried for a while to fight it the old way, to brick the wolf back up, to starve her down, to be small and quiet and unremarkable again. But it was like trying to bury a fire with paper. The harder she pressed her down, the more fiercely the wolf strained toward the one thing that had finally called her home. And the strange, terrifying truth of it was that Maren no longer wanted to win. Every day with Asher made the cage she had built around herself look less like protection and more like the cruelest thing anyone had ever done to her. And she had done it herself, on someone else's orders. Because she had been taught that her own power was a danger she was obligated to lock away. "They told me what I was," she said to him once, abruptly, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, both of them up to their elbows in a tank of warm water, bathing an injured dog. "My pack. Growing up, they told me a female of my bloodline was volatile, unstable, that the wolf in me was a wildfire that would burn down everything I loved if I ever let her out. So I learned to keep her chained. I thought I was protecting everyone." She did not look up from the dog. "It took me 8 years to even start wondering whether they told me that because it was true, or because a chained wildfire is so much easier to own than a free one." Asher's hands went still in the water. "What do you think now?" "I think," Maren said slowly, "that I have never once in my whole life hurt a single thing I love. I think the only fire in me is the kind that warms a room. And I think the people who taught me to fear myself knew that perfectly well." Her voice dropped. "I think they were never afraid of what I'd do if I got loose. I think they were afraid of what I'd be worth to them if I ever stopped believing I needed them to hold my leash." He came around the tank then, water dripping from his forearms, and he took her wet face in his wet hands, and he looked at her with those amber eyes as though she were the only fixed point in a turning world. "You are not a wildfire," he said. "You are not a danger to be managed or an asset to be owned or a problem anyone has to solve. You are a woman who walked into a blizzard alone to save a creature she'd been told was too dangerous to live. That's who you are when no one's watching and no one's holding any leash. That's the truth of you. Everything else was a story told by men who wanted to keep you small." His thumbs brushed the corners of her eyes. "You can be as large as you actually are now, Maren. I promise you the room is big enough. I promise you I am not afraid of 1 inch of it." That was the night, or near enough to it, that the last of the wall came down. She told him things after that she had never told anyone. Small things, mostly. The kind that don't sound like much until you understand a person was never once allowed to say them out loud. that she had taught herself to be a veterinarian precisely because animals couldn't ask her where she came from, that she still slept with one ear toward the door, that she had not used her real name in 8 years, until he said it back to her on that first night, and she'd had to pretend the shock on her face was the cold. Asher took each one the way he took the frightened animals, without grabbing, without flinching, setting each confession down gently between them, like something that mattered. He never once made her feel that she had handed him a weapon. By the end, she understood that this too was a kind of strength she'd never been shown, the strength to be trusted with a soft thing and not close your hand around it. "You can tell me, you know," Asher said one evening quietly, not looking at her. They were closing up the clinic together, the last patient gone home, the snow coming down soft and slow and blue past the windows. "Whatever it is you carry, whatever was done to you to make you bury yourself this deep, I'm not going to hand you back to anyone, Maren. There is not a soul on this earth I would let take you one single step in a direction you didn't choose to go. Whatever you tell me lives and dies in this room." She turned, and the truth rose up so close to the surface that she could taste the salt of it. "I am a wolf. I was promised like a parcel of land to a man who looked at me and saw only strong suns and a sealed border. I ran. I buried her so deep and so long that I truly believed I had finally smothered her for good. All of it, right there, trembling behind her teeth. She said none of it. What she said instead, in barely more than a whisper, was, 'Why are you so kind to me? You don't even know who I am.' 'Because you're mine,' he said simply. And then, seeing the old flinch go through her at the word, he set down the box in his hands and crossed the room to her. And he took her face between his two great careful hands, the exact way he held the most frightened animals, and his voice dropped to something low and raw, and entirely without armor. Not the way they meant it. Hear me. Not owned, not kept, not a thing on a shelf or a name in a ledger. His thumbs moved gently along her jaw. Mine, the way the mountain is mine. Something I would give my whole life to protect and would never once in that life imagine I had any right to cage. You are mine, Maren Hollis, and what that means, the only thing it has ever meant to me, is that I am also, completely and without any taking back, yours. And I am going to spend whatever days I'm given showing you that the word can mean something 1,000 times better than whatever was done to it before you got here." She kissed him. She had not decided to. There was no decision in it at all, only 8 years of buried longing breaking loose at once, like a river through a failed dam, like an animal finally let off a chain it had stopped believing it would ever be free of. And the instant her lips found his, the silver mark on her shoulder flared bright and warm enough to glow clean through the fabric of her shirt, and the wolf inside her, awake now and unafraid and home at last, threw back her head in the dark and sang. After that night, there was no more pretending, not between the two of them. She told him everything the following evening, curled into the corner of his great couch, with the fire burned low to embers and the long warm weight of his arm around her shoulders. She told him she had been born a wolf in a pack far to the east, out on the cold flat plains, where the old laws still ran exactly as they had run for hundreds of years, unchanged and unquestioned. She told him that her parents had died when she was very small, and that the leaders of that pack had raised her not as a daughter, but as a kind of asset to be managed. A rare female of an old and unusually powerful bloodline, valuable, watched, walked carefully toward her purpose. She told him that before she was even fully grown, they had promised her, formally under the old laws, to the alpha of an allied pack, to seal an alliance and merge 2 territories into one. She had not been a child to those men. She had been a treaty waiting to be signed. "His name doesn't matter," she said, when she felt Asher's jaw go hard against the top of her head. "What matters is what he was. He didn't want a mate. He never even pretended to. He wanted a possession of the right bloodline who could give him strong sons. The true bond never came. There was never a mark, never an answer, because the soul does not lie even when every person in the room is lying. But he didn't care about the bond. He thought it was sentiment, weakness, a thing for lesser wolves. He cared about the blood and the land. So the night before the ceremony that would have bound me to him for the rest of my life under the old laws, I ran. I cut my own wolf out of myself, near enough, buried her, starved her down to silence, and I taught myself over years to pass for a human woman. And I ran 2,000 miles, all the way to a little town in these mountains, where I was certain no one had ever even heard that the old laws existed. And you have been afraid, Asher said very softly, every single day since. Every single day. She turned her face up to his. Until you. He held her through the whole of that night, and he asked her for nothing. And somewhere before dawn, the old familiar fear had quietly changed its shape. Smaller now, no longer the only thing in the room, made to share the space with something newer and far more frightening that felt dangerously, impossibly like hope. "Why didn't you ever come looking?" she asked him near dawn, when she had told him all of it. "You knew the moment we touched. You knew what I was. You could have pressed. Most would have. Because you'd already been hunted enough for one lifetime," Asher said simply. "I wasn't going to be one more thing chasing you. I figured if any of it was real, the bond, the rest of it, then the realest thing I could possibly do was prove it by never once making you feel cornered. Love that needs you cornered isn't love. It's just hunger that learned good manners." He was quiet a moment. "I wanted you to come to it the way you came up that mountain in the first place. On your own, because you chose to, because something in you decided the risk was worth it. Anything less, and I'd never have known if it was you I had, or just somebody too tired to keep running." Maren lay against his chest and listened to the steady drum of his heart, and understood, slowly, that she had spent her whole life mistaking possession for devotion, that the men who had owned her had called their grip love, and she had believed them, because she had never been shown the other thing to compare it to. This was the other thing. This was what it was supposed to feel like, not a fist closing, a hand opening. The pack took her in with a speed that left her breathless. Quinn, the wiry, dark-haired woman from the photographs on the mantel, Asher's second and his oldest and fiercest friend, took one single look at the silver moon on Maren's shoulder, burst immediately into tears, and crushed her into a hug so fierce her ribs creaked in protest. "Do you have the faintest idea?" Quinn demanded thickly into her hair, refusing to let go. "How many years we have all stood here and watched this enormous, stubborn idiot carry this entire pack on his own back and let no one help him. And you found him chained on the ice. You drove up a closed mountain in the dark to save what you thought was a dying dog." She pulled back and held Maren at arm's length, eyes streaming, fierce and grinning. "You are not just his mate. You are a miracle, and you are ours now, and that's the end of it." Beside her, an enormous quiet man named Kane simply nodded once, slowly, which Quinn solemnly assured her was, in the private language of Kane, roughly the equivalent of an offer of lifelong devotion. For the first time in the whole of her life, Maren had a family that she had chosen freely, and that had turned around and freely, joyfully, chosen her right back. Asher asked her to marry him up on the ridge where she had first found him. The same wide, wind-scoured shelf of ice, transformed now, the cruel iron pins, long since torn out of the frozen ground and thrown down the mountain. He did not kneel. That was not their way. He stood, and he took both of her hands in both of his, and he told her plainly that he had been carried up to the coldest and loneliest place he knew and left there to die forgotten, and that she had walked straight out of the dark and the storm to bring him back to the living, and that he wanted nothing else from whatever years he had left except to spend them walking back toward her every single morning, on purpose, by choice. She said yes before he had even finished asking, and that night, Beneath a high full moon, with her own full and willing consent given freely for the first time in her life, he marked her as his own. And as the silver crescent on her shoulder deepened and settled and bloomed into something permanent and whole and right, Maren Hollis finally understood all the way down what the bond between true mates actually was. It was not a chain. It had never been a chain. It was the very first thing in her entire existence that had ever truly, completely set her free. A true mate bond, Asher explained to her in the quiet days that followed, was a thing of the soul before it was ever a thing of the body. And once it had been sealed beneath the moon, it ran in both directions at once, deeper than distance, deeper than words. He could feel her now, he said faintly and always, a warm and steady presence at the back of his mind, like a hearth fire he could find his way home to from anywhere on earth. When she was happy, somewhere in his own chest he felt it. When she was afraid, he felt that too. "It isn't spying," he promised her, suddenly almost bashful about it. "I can't hear your thoughts. I wouldn't want to. It's more like, I will always know if you need me, no matter how far, no matter what. I will always know which way to run." Maren, who had spent 8 long years making certain that no one alive could ever find her, discovered to her own astonishment that she did not mind being found. Not by him. Being found by him felt like the opposite of being caught. They set the wedding for the first true thaw. Quinn appointed herself the commander of every single detail and cheerfully terrorized the entire pack into cooperation. Cain built an arch of mountain pine with his own 2 enormous hands, sanding each joint smooth, and would let no one help him. Maren wrote and rewrote her vows 100 times over and finally tore up every draft, deciding she would simply stand up on the day and say whatever was true in the moment she had to say it. She was happier than she had ever once believed a person was allowed to be. Which was, of course, precisely the moment the past she had run from finally found her. It came on an ordinary grey afternoon, while Asher was up the mountain and Maren was alone in the clinic, head bent, stitching a torn ear on a rancher's old cattle dog. The bell over the door rang, and then a scent reached her on the cold draught from the open door, cold flat plains, old wood smoke, a particular sharpness she had not breathed in 8 years and would have known in her grave, and the curved suture needle slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, and the wolf inside her went utterly silent and still. She did not turn around right away. She did not have to. She knew the tread of those boots on her clean floor, the way a person knows the sound of a door they have spent a lifetime trying to keep shut. Whatever passed between them in that small, bright room, Maren let no one see. She closed the clinic an hour early. She drew the blinds, and when she finally came out, well after dark, her face had gone smooth and still and unreadable as the surface of a frozen lake, and she did not tell Asher a single word about who had come, or what had been said, or why her hands would not quite stop their faint and constant trembling for the rest of that long night. The 3 days before the wedding ought to have been the happiest of Maren Hollis's life. To everyone watching, they very nearly looked it. She helped Quinn argue with the flowers. She let Cain walk her out to the finished pine arch and show her each smooth-sanded joint with shy, enormous pride. She laughed in the right places. She held Asher a little too tightly in the dark and pressed her face into the warm cedar scent of him as though she were trying to memorize it. And when he murmured sleepily that he had never in all his days been so purely happy, she said nothing back at all, only held on harder. He felt it, of course. The bond ran both ways, and he felt that something in her had gone quiet and strange and far away, like a radio playing in a sealed room down a long hall. But every time he asked, gently, always gently, she only smiled and turned it aside and told him it was nerves, that brides were allowed their nerves, that she had simply never let herself want anything this much before and didn't quite know how to hold it. And because he loved her, and because he had spent his whole life learning to give frightened things room, He let it lie. He told himself there would be a lifetime to coax the rest of it out of her. He told himself the hard part was over, and the cold was behind them both for good. He was wrong about that. He did not yet know how wrong. On the second of those 3 nights, unable to sleep, Maren slipped out of bed and stood at the great windows of the house above the timberline, watching the moon ride the black ridgeline, and Quinn found her there in the dark. "You don't have to tell me," Quinn said, coming to stand beside her, not touching, just there. "But I've buried a mate, Maren. I know the particular shape a person makes when they're already grieving something everyone else thinks they're about to celebrate. So I'll only say this once, and then I'll leave you be." She paused. "Whatever it is you think you have to carry alone, you don't. That's the whole point of us. That's the only thing we're for. Nobody in this pack falls all the way through. Not you, not ever. You hear me?" Maren's throat closed so hard she could not answer. She wanted, with an intensity that frightened her, to turn and tell Quinn everything. The scent on the draft, the boots on her clean floor, the terms, the price. To let the net catch her the way it had caught a weeping father and an elderly couple and a grieving widow. But she'd already done the arithmetic 100 times in the dark, and it always came out the same. If she told them, they would fight. And if they fought, the thing she was trading everything to prevent would happen anyway, and it would be her fault twice over. So she only said, "Thank you. For the flowers. For all of it. You made me feel like I had a family." "You don't have a family," Quinn corrected gently. "You are family. There's a difference, and it doesn't come undone." She squeezed Maren's shoulder once and went back to bed, and never knew that she had just made the hardest part of what was coming infinitely harder. The last morning, before the light came, Maren lay awake and watched Asher sleep. He slept the way he did everything, wholly, without guard, one arm thrown out across the space where she lay, as though even in dreaming he was reaching to make sure she was still there. She memorized him. The line of his jaw gone soft in sleep, the old pale scars across his knuckles, the slow tide of his breathing. She memorized the warmth of him, and the cedar smell of him, and the impossible, undeserved safety of him, and she pressed all of it down into the deepest part of herself, into the place the wolf lived, where she prayed it might survive whatever was coming. Because she understood, lying there in the grey before dawn, that this was the last morning of the only happiness she had ever been allowed, and that she was about to set fire to it with her own 2 hands, and call it love, and let no one ever know that was what it was. On the morning of the wedding, the pack gathered up on the ridge, the very same wind-scoured shelf of ice where she had found him chained and dying, transformed now beyond knowing with pine boughs and white ribbon, and the whole laughing, joyful family that had taken her in. The sky overhead was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The fresh snow across the ridge caught the morning light and threw it back like a field of shattered glass. Asher waited beneath Cain's pine arch in a dark coat, his blonde hair bright as a struck match in the hard sun, his amber eyes fixed and shining on the path where she would appear. And the look on his face, in the unguarded moment before he knew anyone was watching it, was so completely naked with love and with hope that more than one hardened member of the Timberline pack had to look away and clear their throat and blink hard at the trees. Then Maren stepped out onto the path, and she was not alone. A second figure walked at her side, a tall man, immaculate, dressed in clothes too fine for the mountains, with a smooth and easy smile. He walked close to her, one hand at the small of her back, and Maren did not move away from it. She walked up the path on his arm, unhurried, her chin level, her face calm. The pack went silent. The joyful sound died in their throats. Asher's outstretched hand lowered slowly to his side. "Maren," he said, "there's no wedding." Her voice was flat and clear and carried across the whole ridge. There was never going to be one. "I don't—" Asher stopped. "Who is this?" "Magnus," she said. "I was promised to him years ago, back east. I should have told you. I didn't because it was easier not to." She glanced around at the pine arch, the ribbon, the gathered pack, the way a person looks at a room they are about to leave. This was never going to last, Asher. You have to have known that. A pack like yours, a life like this, it was a nice place to wait out the season. That's all it ever was. A low sound moved through the timberline wolves. Asher did not make it. He stood very still. "The bond," he said. "An old trick of my bloodline. It can be called up." She lifted one shoulder. "It convinces people. It convinced you." "That's not—" His voice cracked, and he stopped it. "Look at me and say it. Say none of it was real." She looked at him. None of it was real. Magnus's smile did not move. He had not said a single word. He didn't need to. "I'm going home," Maren said. "To my own kind. To him. I'm sorry you got the wrong idea." She turned, and Magnus turned with her, his hand still at her back, and the two of them started back down the path. "Don't follow me, Asher. There's nothing here to follow." She walked away on the other man's arm, down off the ridge, between the silent rows of the pack she had eaten and laughed and lived among, and she did not look back. Not once. Not at Quinn, who had her hand pressed over her mouth. Not at Cain, who had built the arch. Not at Asher, who stood beneath it and watched her go, and did not move and did not speak and did not stop her, because she had not given him one reason to. The timberline pack did not raise a claw. There was nothing to raise it against. A woman had changed her mind and gone home with the man she belonged to. That was all anyone on that ridge had seen. Maren got into the car. Magnus drove. The mountains shrank in the side mirror, and then the road turned, and they were gone, and the flat grey plains opened up ahead, mile after mile after mile, carrying her east, away, back to where she had started. The story does not end on that ridge, though it would be easy to believe it did. Why would a woman walk away from a love like that, on the arm of a stranger, the day she was meant to marry? This channel has been demonetized, but this project, and the love that lives inside it, is worth keeping alive. So Part 1 will always remain here, free for everyone. Part 2 waits on Patreon, where the story can be told in full and watched without a single ad to interrupt it. The truth of what Maren sacrificed, the bond that betrayed her captor, and the homecoming that was promised under the full moon. The link is pinned in the first comment.